The most brutal day in medieval military history was fought on March 29, 1461, at the Battle of Towton during England's Wars of the Roses. In a blinding snowstorm, tens of thousands of Yorkist and Lancastrian soldiers clashed in a struggle for the crown, producing an unprecedented death toll for a single day on English soil. The scale of the fighting, the ferocity of the tactics, and the absence of mercy orders turned this Civil War engagement into a defining example of medieval warfare's capacity for mass slaughter and lasting political upheaval. Number 1. Prelude to the Bloodshed. On March 29, 1461, the Battle of Towton unfolded under a punishing Palm Sunday snowstorm, in what is often described as the deadliest single day in medieval English history. It took place during the Wars of the Roses, a dynastic conflict between the houses of York and Lancaster for control of the English crown. Around 50,000 combatants, possibly more, gathered on the plateau near Towton village, a force representing a significant share of the nation's fighting strength. The Yorkist army was commanded by Edward, Earl of March, who was on the verge of becoming King Edward IV, while the Lancastrian forces rallied to defend the weak and mentally unstable Henry VI. The political stakes were absolute. This was not a skirmish, but a decisive encounter that could end one claim to the throne entirely. The battlefield was chosen for its strategic position, but it was also a trap. The ridge was hemmed in by the river Cock Beck and areas of marsh, leaving narrow flanks and few routes for withdrawal. This geography meant that any retreat could quickly collapse into a slaughter. On the morning of the battle, wind-driven snow swept across the field, reducing visibility and chilling men to the bone. Armor became icy and stiff, bowstrings damp and unreliable. The ground softened into treacherous mud, making even the act of standing in formation exhausting. Soldiers had to fight the weather before they even met the enemy. Each army had prepared for weeks, gathering men-at-arms, archers, and retainers bound by feudal loyalty. The Yorkists positioned themselves to exploit the wind, allowing their longbowmen to shoot farther, forcing the Lancastrians to advance uphill under arrow fire. This early phase was decisive. Lancastrian return volleys fell short, wasting ammunition and sapping morale. Once their quivers were depleted, close combat became inevitable. The order was given by both sides to take no prisoners, an unusually brutal command even for the era, guaranteeing that the day's violence would be absolute. The opening exchanges set the tone for what would become hours of unrelenting melee. In these moments before the main lines clashed, the combined pressure of climate, terrain, and tactical positioning had already stacked the odds. Towton was primed to be more than just a battle. It was about to become a day of unparalleled carnage in the medieval world. Number 2. Opening moves and deadly tactics. The morning snow squall did more than make men shiver. It tilted the physics of the battlefield. With a strong tailwind, the Yorkist archers could loft shafts farther and flatter, while the Lancastrians, shooting into the gust and sleet, watched their volleys fall short. That mismatch mattered twice. First in morale, because men under accurate fire tend to close ranks or creep forward. Second in logistics, because every arrow that thudded harmlessly into the churned ground could be picked up and returned. Contemporary descriptions and later battlefield studies note that Yorkist bowmen stepped out, harvested the underpowered shafts lying between the lines, and sent them back at lethal ranges, a simple act that multiplied their ammunition while draining the enemies. Visually, command and control were already strained. Wind drove snow into faces, muddling shouted orders and banner signals. The Lancastrians, forced to advance to bring their own archers into effective range, trudged uphill over slick clay, squeezing formation depth and tiring men before steel-touched armor. Once quivers thinned, the fight compressed into the brutal grammar of close combat. English infantry in this era did not rely on elegant swordplay. They worked with tools built for plate and mail, bills with hooked blades for dragging men from the line or off saddles, poleaxes combining axe, hammer, and spike to dent helmets, split visors, and punch into joints, and shortened longbows swung like clubs when bodies locked. The mechanics of these weapons favored disciplined, shoulder-to-shoulder work hook, pull, thrust, step, rather than individual heroics. Armor helped, but fatigue helped more. Mail and plate shed arrow energy, yet every extra pound sapped balance in clinging mud, and every stumble opened a gap that neighbors had to cover. On Towton's constricting ground between ridge and watercourses, there was little lateral space to recover a stagger, so files behind pushed to keep the front from folding, adding crushing pressure to the melee's front meter. Leadership reacted with pragmatic signals, horns for shifts in weight, small reserves edging into soft spots. But the weather erased finesse. The day's opening logic is therefore straightforward. Wind and slope forced one side to waste ammunition and cohesion, while the other side conserved arrows, exploited visibility, and set conditions for a grinding hand-to-hand phase, where hooked bills and heavy poleaxes, not bright lances, decided who kept footing and who went down. Number 3. The fight turns catastrophic. By midday, the battle had settled into a grinding melee when fresh Yorkist troops Norfolk's delayed division appeared on the Lancastrian flank and changed the arithmetic of fatigue, frontage, and morale. The exact timing and immediate impact are debated, but the effect was cumulative rather than cinematic. A tired line that had already burned its arrow supply and labored for hours in sleet began to sag at the edges where the new pressure fell. Commanders tried to dress the ranks, but the snow and wind hampered visibility, horns carried poorly, and standards vanished in the murk. Small patches buckled, files folded, and what had been a broadly even push turned into a series of local crises. The weapons that mattered in this phase, bills and poleaxes, were made for this kind of attrition, hooking an exposed limb, dragging a man down, then finishing with hammer or spike. Armor still saved lives, yet every pound meant more energy burned and slower recovery from a stumble. On Towton's clay, once you went to a knee, the press behind and the slick ground made getting up hard. As the fresh Yorkist contingent squeezed the flank, the Lancastrian line lost the ability to rotate tired men out or thicken threatened points. Gaps opened at unit joins, where captains' retinues met and communications were already thin. These hinges are where routs usually begin, and Towton followed the pattern. Banners falling were more than symbolic. Each standard marked an authority node that kept men in place. When one went down, the neighboring files felt suddenly uncovered. Reports from the day stressed that neither side had intended to offer quarter, and once one wing began to give, that promise of no mercy accelerated the break. Men threw off sallets and even pieces of mail to run faster, trading protection for speed. It helped for minutes, then hurt when pursuers reached them. The ground dictated where fear would flow. Between the ridge and the streams, movement narrowed into chutes, and the obvious escape routes tracks toward road crossings and fords became kill zones. The Cock Beck, swollen by melting snow, turned from an obstacle into a mass grave. Fleeing soldiers in partial armor tried to wade or scramble the banks. Many slipped, were dragged under by soaked gambesons and hauberks, or were trampled at entry points as the press behind forced bodies forward. Chroniclers later wrote of a bridge of bodies, a phrase that reads like hyperbole, yet aligns with what route mechanics predict at a constricted crossing when thousands converge in panic. Archaeology adds texture to those claims. The Towton Hall mass grave includes skulls with multiple sharp and blunt force traumas, many to the rear or crown, consistent with pursuit strikes and finishing blows, as well as cuts to forearms that look like last-moment parries. Skeletal evidence also shows healed injuries from earlier campaigns, a reminder that a core of veterans fought here, men who knew how to kill quickly in a crowd, and who would not linger over a fallen foe. Norfolk's arrival mattered not only because it added numbers, but because it delivered fresher men at the right place in the cycle of exhaustion. After hours of push and counterpush, a rested wing can move, keep formation, and exploit terrain, while the other side fights oxygen debt and cramp. Once the Lancastrian flank bent, Yorkist units on the interior could pivot and apply oblique pressure, turning a waver into a fold, and a fold into a flight. From there, violence migrated off the formal field. The chase ran down toward Bloody Meadow and along the beck, where pursuers cut down men trying to cross or slogging along the bank. Casualty figures from the day are uncertain and often inflated, but the distribution is telling. A large share of the dead likely fell not in the line-to-line press, but in that hour when discipline cracked and the landscape turned into a funnel. This is how battlefield geometry, weather, and a single fresh division transform a stalemate into a catastrophe-less, a sudden thunderclap and more a progressive failure that ends with bodies piling at crossings and tracks, the pursuers' work continuing long after organized resistance ceased. Number 4. Casualties without precedent. The headline number most people know. 28,000 dead comes from heralds' counts reported soon after the battle, and it captures the magnitude, if not the exact arithmetic. What matters for understanding Towton's casualty profile is how that figure was produced and why deaths concentrated where and when they did. Counting in the 15th century was neither systematic nor neutral. Heralds tallied bodies on and beyond the field,